Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Please permit me to call this meeting to order. I'll call on stage Professor Clifford Niboy Teko to give their welcome remarks. Thank you.
Well, the president of the academy is away, and I have been pulled by the scruff of the neck to stand in for him to make the opening remarks. My locus is that I'm the chairman of the steering committee of the project that we are implementing. Vice presidents and fellows of the academy, invited participants, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I am delighted to welcome you all to the Academy of Arts and Sciences. And we're grateful that you could make the time to be here. When I picked up the papers and I saw Justice Sofa AB, I said, wow. So you're welcome, Madam Lady Justice. And it's also good to see a very senior man, Professor Akila Pasoya, who's find time to join us. We are hopeful that the time together here will provide some stimulating thoughts for policy formulation in the higher education space. I also acknowledge participants from the higher education sector or subsector in Ghana, from both the public and private universities. I'm not sure who is from the from Parliament, because we normally invite people from this select committee, parliamentary select committee on education. But there are others from Ghana Tertiary Education Commission, GTED, Ministry of Education, the Bank of Ghana, GCB Bank, Access Bank, Association of Ghana Industries, Ghana Employers Association, and student representatives. You're all welcome. But we are here today to conduct a policy dialogue on managing Ghana's public universities in the new age. Some may recall that this is the fourth of 7 policy dialogues that the Ghana Academy is organizing under the project Motivating Higher Education Reforms in Ghana Towards Equity and Sustainability. And this is funded by a grant from the Carnegie Corporation, New York. The goal of the Ghana Academy's Higher Education Project is to provide a platform for independent persons and groups to reflect on the challenges of the higher education sector on a regular and sustained basis. and we hope to bring together different stakeholders to undertake reviews of current policies and inject independent research evidence to inform new policy considerations. Our forums and platforms can also provide a safe space or a sounding board to explore emergent higher education policy issues. Above all, we want to facilitate consensus building through open and objective discussion of higher education policy. For today's dialogue on managing Ghana's public universities in a new age, we bringing together selected stakeholders from the organizations I've mentioned already. And there's a background paper to set the tone for the deliberations, followed by a review of the paper, panel discussion, and finally an open forum. The Academy expects that what we deliberate on and capture here can serve as a basis for innovative reforms. It is our expectation also that this policy dialogue will offer greater opportunities for the participants or the organizations to collaborate with the Academy on projects of mutual interest. So we expect that everybody will participate fully and share their thoughts and be part of the solution that we're seeking. On the behalf of the President, I want to wish you fruitful deliberations. With these opening remarks, may I invite all of us to join me front here for a group picture, after which we offer some breakfast, especially for those who may have had to rush here without even a cup of cocoa. So please, you're invited to the front here. And right after that, Emerita Professor Techua Menu will take over to moderate the process. Thank you all very much.
Sorry, I'm sorry to break up the party, but if you can resume your seat, please. So good morning once again, and I want to thank our distinguished participants for making time to join us this morning. The chair mentioned a number of people, participants who should have been here, but I think they believe that this is very much an internal session for the universities. That's how I can explain. Of course, the season is also partly to blame. But when they look at the topic of managing Ghana's public universities in a new age, many of them, the bankers, etc., must feel that this is eminently subject for the technicians themselves. So without much ado, I'm going to call on the consultant who prepared the background paper, Professor Joseph Roland Achu Ayi, to come and give us his presentation, after which we will have the review and the panel discussion. Professor Ayi needs very little introduction. Apart from being the consultant, he's also Vice President for the Arts at the Ghana Academy of Arts and Sciences, and has had a distinguished career as a professor and a university administrator. So, Professor Ayi.
No, thank you, Madam Moderator, and good morning and Merry Christmas in advance to all of you. I've been asked to speak for 30 minutes and distill a paper, a 100-page paper into 8 slides. So I'll try as much as possible to do what I can. So managing Ghana's public universities in a new age. I set out to do a couple of things in this paper. First, I'll present 3 key messages. Then go back to the introduction, the objectives and methodology, the findings, recommendations, the conclusion, and then acknowledgement. So what are the 3 key messages? If you have not heard anything this morning, what are the 3 key messages you want to take home? The first thing which I want to, first message is that public universities in Ghana are struggling to cope with the shifts of managing universities into multiversities and, of course, omniversities. There's the difference between university, multiversity, and omniversity. University, coined by the German, scholar Wilhelm von Humboldt and Cardinal John Henry Newman. They coined the idea of a university cloistered. That's why we have the ivory tower. So, and with a university, there is a common community, common interest, and a common soul. But that has moved to multiversity with different stakeholders, alumni, students, trade unions, faculty, public, the private, sector, governments, etc., etc. Now, but then the new term, which was coined, multiversity was actually coined in 1963 by Clark Kerr
who used to be the president of University of California, when he gave a lecture. But what we have now is Omniversity, coined in 2021 by a World Bank expert, Roberta Bassett. And in Omniversity, you are talking about everything involved. Indeed, actually, it is what we call the borderless university or university without walls. So how can a university based on the Cambodian, Newian idea move to multiversity and omniversity? That's what our universities are struggling to cope with. And so it comes with tensions about the past, the present, and the future. It comes with unique governance and management problems. The second lesson, the second message which I would like to point out is that university missions, mandates, governance, and management have all changed to respond to what is called the neoliberal approach to managing universities. And as Mahmoud Mandani said, academics all of a sudden are in the midst of, quote and unquote, the marketplace. So the point is that the university missions, governance, management have been more or less forced to deal with market reforms, brought largely by the new public management. And the new public management is very straightforward. Bring private sector principles and practices to the public sector and they will work. But as we have seen, they have not worked because of problems, such as access, equity, fairness, and uniformity. The third message, which is very important, is that so in the new age, in the fourth industrial revolution, the universities will have to reposition themselves through new legal policy and institutional framework, and at the same time to deepen effective reform strategies. These are the three messages of this paper. So the introduction, there has been renewed interest and concern, interest in and concern about managing universities because it has become a major public policy issue in the 21st century. So everywhere managing universities, everybody's talking, not only in Ghana, but all across the world. People have been talking about how to manage universities because it has become a major public policy issue for three basic reasons. In the first place, as I've said, there has been this struggle to take care of the postmodern university, which deals with ideas, such as multiversity, omniversity, which deals with ideas, such as enterprise or entrepreneurial. Universities are supposed to be entrepreneurial. They take risks, undertake market reforms, etc. So that has been the tension between dealing with managerialism, the new public management, market reforms. But that has also brought another important issue of the diversity and the complexity of the stakeholders. So now we talk about several stakeholders. We talk about several governance and management models. We talk about budgets. We talk about competition. We talk about internationalization, we talk about ranking of universities, we talk about globalization, we talk about the tension between teaching and research. How can we balance tension and research? Even though the Hambodian and Newenian ideas are clear that teaching and research are mutually reinforcing, there has always been, a tension. Indeed, now, if you look at the university, the argument is that, look, there should be some lecturers who will only teach. That's what they have to do, period. There are others who will have to research, period. And there will have to be others who will have to do both, teaching and research. So the complexity and the diversity in dealing with stakeholders, not with common interest, but diverse and varied interests, and sometimes contradictory interests. Then the whole issue of the international environment, the globalization, the internationalization, the ranking, and the unpredictability of the international environment, the pandemics, and then, of course, market volatility, all that. So the point I want to buttress is that we need to understand this complexity and diversity to enable us reposition the universities to pursue their mandates in a new context. So what are the objectives of the paper? First, we need to discuss some of the success or otherwise of the post-1990 reforms. The post-1990 reforms in the universities dealt with the new public management, bringing market reforms to our universities. Market reforms, user charges, performance, contract, public-private partnerships, etc., all those. But were these able to cure the ills of the university? Is the NPM able to cure the ills of the university? And I'll return to that thing. And then, of course, we also want to see how these new models of governance and management, how are they going to sustain the institutions going forward? In terms of methodology, I remember one of the reviewers made a comment that, he would have liked maybe some primary data of interviewing some past and current university administrators, but the research, we didn't have time. So this is basically a desk research, and it draws on documentary, secondary, and digital sources. At the same time, this is supplemented. These are supplemented with my own reflective account of being in university administration for 16 years. What are the findings? What are the findings? Whether we like it or not, issues of governance and management have serious implications for mandates of universities. When you are talking about governance of universities, you are talking about policy and strategic issues which are taken care of by the government institutions, by parliament, and by government institutions, I mean the Ministry of Education, the Ghana Tertiary Education Commission, by parliament because it makes laws about fees, it also revises the acts of the universities. So, and then of course, the internal governance structure is the council. So you are talking about governance, you are talking about the the external governance structure led by the government and the internal governance structure led by the council. And then we are talking about management. You are talking about the vice chancellor and the and then the senior management team. And sometimes when we are talking about management structure, people feel that, oh, you are referring to the vice chancellor and the executive management. But you are also referring to the registrar. People, we have tended to relegate the crucial role of the registrary in the administration of universities in Ghana and elsewhere. The second issue that I would also like to say is that the mandates of universities have followed the trajectory of most African universities. They were first set up as colonial institutions. Then, of course, there was a period of Africanization. And then, of course, the period of neoliberalism. So 3 phases of the African university: colonial creation, becoming Africanization, being Africanized, or becoming national, having national mandates to lead development, and then becoming entrepreneurial or enterprise. But I want to say here that if you look at our universities across, whether even in the public sector, whether in the private sector, I would qualify them as quasi-entrepreneurial or quasi-enterprise because they have not achieved the whole, or they have not run the full scale of entrepreneurship. To be entrepreneurial, there are certain, conditions. A classic example is less government interference, less parliamentary interference, etc., in the fixing of fees, etc. So we'll come to that. Then, of course, I would also like to say that some of the policies and directives of governments or government institutions have become counterproductive, and they have undermined the autonomy or the independence of the universities. I'll cite an example here. If you look at the Presidential Transition Act 2012, Act 845, Section 14(1), it says that an incoming president, when an incoming president is elected, those holding office under the schedule listed would lose their positions. And one of the lists there is statutory boards and corporations. And the university councils have also become these statutory boards and corporations. So when there is a new president, all the councils are no longer there, including those who have been institutionally represented, like TEU, like UTAG, and all that. So the councils become dysfunctional because of the transition process. This is not good for an emerging entrepreneurial university. Then there is this issue of, of the fees and charges Miscellaneous Provisions Act 2022, which empowers Parliament to approve all fees to be charged by universities. We all know that universities do not get the required funding, but all fees, and there was a directive from the ministry recently that fees must not be above a certain limit, and there was also another directive earlier on by a minister that 34% of internally generated funds of universities must be sent to the consolidated fund. These are inimical to the growth of a full-scale entrepreneurial university. I want to also look at the legal, the policy and institutional frameworks of the universities. If you look at the universities, there are several legal, policy, and institutional frameworks. If you take the legal framework, we take the acts, the statutes. If you take the policies, there are several policies. If you take KNUST, they have 42 policies on several things, on several issues. You know, for instance, plagiarism, examinations, promotions, appointments, what have you. So those policies are there. But then there are institutions, universities run on boards and committees. And for me, the legal, the policy, and the institutional framework are there to enable universities to actually initiate reforms and manage them. They don't need anybody from us. Maybe they may say, well, what are your reforms about? You can say that. But I think the universities are sufficiently close with these institutions to deal with issues relating to reforms. After all, crises and reforms are linked together. Then, of course, we have the NPM, or the new public management reform strategies, which were actually implemented in the 1990s. So decentralization through the collegiate system, KNUST, University of Ghana, and Cape Coast being the three oldest universities, they have the collegiate system. KNUST and University of Ghana have reviewed their collegiate system. Cape Coast is also trying to do that. So that's one. Then, of course, internally generated funds, very important. Teaching and learning strategies have been reviewed. Then, of course, the whole issue of a shift in vision. If you look at the University of Ghana, it has become a research-intensive university. Others have also tried to do that. Then, of course, the whole issue of public-private partnership. Universities partnering the private sector to undertake certain projects, student hostels. University of Ghana, for instance, has an arrangement with Toyota Ghana on the training of engineers, etc. So very important. Then the whole issue of quality assurance also attracting, attention. And the last but not the least is that the universities have been faced with the problem of crisis management. Crisis management from students, crisis management from unions. And they have been able to deal with these over the years. I always say that every university is unique. None of the 16 public universities are the same because they were established under different circumstances. And so you cannot, like what the Public Universities Bill wanted to do, to bring all of them to harmonize all of them, all their acts together into one. The universities are unique, and therefore, if you want to move forward, we need to maintain their uniqueness. It's very important. It's also part of entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship is about a brand. And a brand means that there must be the unique feature of all the universities. But perhaps one of the things that I would like to say here is that all these market reforms are good, but they have problems. If you take the collegiate system, it's supposed to decentralize a lot of things. But in practice, it has not been able to do so. If you look at the report of the University of Ghana on the review, report of KNUST on the review of the collegiate system, the problems which the collegiate system, the problems which is set out to addressed are still lingering. They need to be completed. So the final thing about the new public management or market reforms is that it does not promote the publicness of public universities. And I think this to me is very important, the publicness of public universities. And there is always, a dilemma. On one hand, generate money. On the other hand, you are supposed to you are supposed to take care of equity, assets, etc. I think as a country, we need to strike the right kind of balance between the publicness of the institutions and their entrepreneurial orientation. Again, the NPM has also been incomplete. Incomplete in the light of the fact that, one, it hinges on performance management. And I think that in our universities, we need to rethink how can we bring about the performance management of staff. All that we do is annual staff appraisal. I think the time has now come for it. If we want to move towards entrepreneurship or the entrepreneurial university or the postmodern university, we also need to manage performance of staff. And then, of course, the whole issue of promotion criteria. I think that the time has now come, for us as a country to harmonize promotions in all the universities, in spite of their uniqueness. So that if you are professor at Legon, you can be professor at KNUST, you can be professor at any of the universities. I think we need, if you are going to build entrepreneurial universities, this is the way to go. My recommendations, I want to also look at recommendations. I think the first thing, if you want to become a postmodern, or if you want our universities to become postmodern, then of course, we need to reconsider the legal and policy framework. The first recommendation here, is that we need to exclude the university councils from these Presidential Transition Acts 845. We need to exclude them. That do they belong to the statutory boards and corporations? They don't belong there. Maybe it was surreptitiously put there. Maybe we need to think about it. I think we need to do that. Of course, I also propose the amending of the Fees and Charges Miscellaneous Provisions Act 22 to give the universities the free hand to charge fees to finance their operations, in spite of the fact that they are public institutions. You see, this is the whole issue. Okay, allow them, they are state institutions, so the state must have a hand in the charging of fees to promote uniformity and equity. It is fine, but again, to me, that the right kind of balance, we need to do that. And then, of course, the other thing that I want us to look at is government must think about limiting directives. GTEC must limit directives that will not frustrate, but will actually facilitate the mandates and operations of the university. Actually, the GTEC, Ministry of Education, all these institutions, government institutions, they are supposed to collaborate with the universities, but not to intervene in the affairs of the universities. I think we need to move away from that. And under legal and policy, I would like to lean on my senior colleague, Professor Ali Masri. He wrote a very important article in 1973. For universities to face the future, they must navigate and negotiate, one, the political distance from the states. Universities must navigate and negotiate political distance from the state. 2, universities must be culturally close to the society. And the third one, they must be intellectually linked to wider scholarly and scientific values of the world of learning. Now let's look at the institutional framework, the recommendations. Over here, I want to look at the whole issue of government interference in the appointment of some vice chancellors to reduce the delay and the uncertainty and the frustration of those who have been recommended. Not only in the appointment of the vice chancellors, but in the appointment of members of the council. Governments must adopt a distant approach when it comes to managing universities or governing universities. So that's very important. I always want to stress the whole issue that there is no single best institutional framework because of the uniqueness of the universities and their peculiar circumstances. University governance is a shared responsibility, shared between the council involved in policy, strategic issues, academic board involved in academic matters, and then administration management led by the vice chancellor, the registrarry, and others. So it's a shared responsibility and must continue to be so. You see, if the council and the management are doing well, of course, the administrators would like to also help the council. The issue came up about the University of Ghana visitation panel. The idea was actually mooted by the then registrar, and the council bought the idea. Even though everybody thought that it was the council, but the idea originally came from the registrar at the time. So there must be close synergy between the administration, the faculty, and of course, the council. The final thing under institutional framework is transformative leadership. This word is all over the place. It has been said, several times. If you look at our universities, we do not have leadership training. We only undergo orientation. So maybe a week's orientation, you are given a handout. If you're head of department, you have a head of department handout and all that. That's it. So to the top level, we do not undergo any structured training. I think for entrepreneurship, the entrepreneurial university, the postmodern university must design a well-structured approach at training its future leaders. The final recommendation, whether we like it or not, yes, reforms have been undertaken in all our universities, but we need to deepen those reforms through strategies. Some people have said that the new public management is dead. Indeed, they said that the marketplace which Mahmoud Mandani referred to is no longer there. But I beg to differ from my senior colleague, Mahmoud Mandani. The new public management is still the baby on the block. How can we fine-tune it? Because we are moving towards an entrepreneurial university or an enterprise university. And if we want to do that, we need some parts of the new public management in going forward. So it is not dead, but how can we do things differently? How can we manage universities differently. Maybe we may have to consider other models. One of the models which came up in New Zealand and in Germany is what is now called the new public service, where the state takes more interest in funding public universities. Maybe we need to deal with that. And then, of course, the other thing that I would like to emphasize is performance based on research production, based on graduation rates of master's and PhD students. I know some of my colleagues who have never ever supervised master's and PhD students. But I think as part of the process, as part of all these, in some universities, it says maybe you should have supervised 10 PhD students to graduation before you are promoted. I said, I think we need to do that. And then we need to look at the publication of theses with students. In some universities, a degree is offered because the student and the supervisor had co-jointly or had jointly published a thesis together. My conclusion: I need to underscore the point earlier on that managing a university is always going to be complex, particularly the postmodern university in the fourth industrial revolution, in the borderless university, or in the university without walls. So it's very important because you are dealing with multiple stakeholders with complex interests, diverse interests, and contradictory interests. And so the universities will need to navigate how they move from university to multiversity and omniversity. That's very important. The post-1990 structures, they have either succeeded in some ways, they have failed in others. But we also need to fine-tune where we have not done well. So my major conclusion is that universities in the new age will have to reposition themselves and take into account the evolving mandates, the diversity of the mandates, their uniqueness, their governance and management structures, and their ability to manage the complex contextual variables. I would like to acknowledge the anonymous reviewers who had read the concept notes and the draft paper. They were very useful. Thanks for listening.
Can we give another round of applause to Professor Ayi? Thank you very much, Prof. I think people hadn't quite digested their breakfast yet when they had to take on board this very dense paper. You remember he mentioned that it was over 100 pages when we had only requested 30-some pages. So I told him, you give me my 30-something pages and take your time to develop your 100+ pages. So I don't envy him at all trying to distill out of this very dense paper to present to us this morning. So he's talked about anonymous reviewers. One will soon be revealed. So as we have done, and I just wanted to say that for some of you who have been coming to these policy dialogues, they are a series and they are related, but they each focus on something very specific. So in his own presentation, he mentioned issues around fees, financing. We have had a policy dialogue on the financing of universities. We've had a policy dialogue on the specific role of the GET Fund. We've had a policy dialogue on the conversion of polytechnics to technical universities. Yes, and today we are having this dialogue on managing public universities. There will be other policy dialogues on the state and university relations, another one on private universities, and another on the expansion of public universities. But we've had to necessarily focus our attention in each dialogue to one critical topic, even though they are related. So we are now going to, we have used a system of internal and external reviews. So we are going to now, we had 2 external reviewers for this paper. Unfortunately, one of them is traveling and has been, they sent in their comments all right. But what we have done is that during the policy dialogue, we asked them to, phone in or make a video to present any extra issues that they want to comment on, because they've seen the final papers of the consultant. So we have one video that has been recorded, and I will ask for it to be played now before we continue. All right, so this is Dr. Ibrahim Wanda, former program officer at Kodesria, currently at the MasterCard Foundation in Kigali, Rwanda. And a specialist on
How are you, colleagues? Thanks again for entrusting me to be a review the work that you are doing. I've so far peer reviewed 2 papers, and I found the papers quite interesting, raising quite important issues, not only regarding higher education in Ghana, but more generally about what's happening in higher education across the continent. Since I have already shared my comments, maybe without going to the details of what comments I wrote and shared with you, allow me to kind of flush out 4 points that guided the kind of comments I shared. And first, note that I shared those comments in the spirit that they will enrich this work, that they will help the authors in trying to take a second look at the work, and that they will contribute to making this a better project, both in terms of the scholarship, but also in terms of its, practical implications. No, there are 4 trends that are taking place as far as higher education is concerned, not only in Africa, but I think worldwide. The first one is what has been with us for quite a while now. The whole idea that higher education at a global level is undergoing different changes. What has been termed as globalization. Others tend to refer that as the new emerging trends in the internationalization of higher education. But implied in these notions are 2 assumptions. First, that the university still remains a global institution. And secondly, that whichever change that higher education in Africa wants to take, then it has to take cognizance of these global changes. What often one misses out is a questioning of what then it will mean for the relationship between the university and the society in Africa, if the kind of changes that we are pursuing in higher education, if the direction of this change in the continent has to generally reflect what is happening elsewhere. It is often assumed that it is Africa that has to change, that it's African universities that have to change and that have to, take a cue from what is happening elsewhere. and reframe, the direction of their change towards that end. Not much attention, for example, is given to thinking what it will mean if we reframe the third question and ask ourselves what then we need to do to make sure that if at all there are changes that are happening, in higher education institutions, in our universities that are constituted properly. What will it mean if those changes were influenced more by what is happening in Africa? If those changes were triggered more, or directed more by the kind of thinking of what the universe should be that is taking place in the continent. And I found this notion running through the papers that I reviewed. And I kind of got a troubling feeling that we are not paying much attention to what is happening in the continent. That it's almost a given, according to the authors, that since higher education generally is changing at a global level, African universities should not be left behind and they should follow that kind of change. And therefore, we find ourselves stuck between debating about what kind of university we need to arrive at should this change happen. Are we going to be stuck at the technical understanding of a university, which seems to be more prevalent in the literature when people are talking about enterprise universities? When people are talking about, graduates and jobs, they're actually looking at the university as something that just performs that technical function. But there is less emphasis on the normative function. In what ways is this university going to change society for the better? If we have a kind of feeling that the present university society is not meeting the needs of humanity. If we just focused on the technical function of this university, producing students for the job market, while not changing the society through which these jobs are being exercised. We therefore talking about a university as something that is transformative. So more generally, this first notion of a university as something that's global, of global trends that are pushing changes to happen in higher education institutions, of African universities that have to change or to focus their direction of change in terms of what's happening globally, kind of leaves a vacuum of what the African contribution to this change should be. It leaves a vacuum in terms of what kind of society Africans, academics, African intellectuals revision for the continent. And I think it's one of those things that I thought I should flash out. And if we will frame, as I tried to indicate in my comments, if we frame this question in the manner that I've done here, then we will first of all start by citing a new literature that informs our theorizing about the kind of change that we need in African universities. It will kind of push us away from the most prevalent Western literature that looks at the university historically as a Western product, to start reimagining a university as something that is constituted by people, kind of reflect on their internal realities. It will kind of force us to go back to the medieval university in Africa and ask ourselves how that was possible in the manner in which it happened, and what kind of remnants of that medieval university in Africa, we can use to architect a new university in the continent that is not stuck at the Western framing of what the university is and what the university should do for the continent. The second framework is just kind of what I've been talking about, and it's what we are currently seeing happening in the continent, the search for an authentic African university. And this has been going on for quite a while. How do we even start thinking that the colonial university that is prevalent in Africa can actually be called an African university? Or we can start reimagining of a new university in the continent which is either modeled within within the context of the medieval university intercontinent in Africa, or emerging from a new thinking about what a university and what higher education needs to for the continent. And these ideas have been around for quite a while. If we remember our colleague, the Ugandan academic Dan Nambudere, and the Benin philosopher Hotunji have actually tried to capture, this yearning for an authentic African university. Nabdere, trying to focus more on a university that is established within a society, a university that, a society as a university in itself, and that reflects the day-to-day realities of the people. And the Benin philosopher Hotunji trying to speak more about how then we can organize disciplines, infused with authentic African thinking, such that we have knowledge coming out of these institutions being authentically African. And more recently, we have seen quite, enormous literature across the continent, and actually outside the continent now talking about the issue of decolonization. You remember what happened, the other day in South Africa, Lords Must Fall, but also triggering a whole movement worldwide, going to Oxford, going to North American universities, saying all of these, institutions were architects, within a colonial model of universities, of institutions, of assumptions of knowledge, and therefore that needed to be retaught. And now in the continent, we have to be a little bit more careful so that we do not get lost in, the global movement talking about colonization. Sometimes it gets a bit uncomfortable when you get a more strong voice for colonization coming from the direction where colonization happened in the first place. So I think we have to be more cautious about that when we are talking about that. But also we see now in our end here, even at the continental level, a more serious new thinking about, new continental frameworks for organizing higher education. The other day, the Association of African Universities launched new metrics for assessing universities in Africa and trying to have those metrics respond to issues that are kind of, more meaningful to Africans, issues of resources and finance, issues of access and fairness, which have been dealt with in the work that I've been reviewed here, but which are getting stuck in a very different theoretical framing where the issue of fairness gets lost out somehow. The issues of teaching and skills, issues of student engagement, again, which is a big issue across the continent on how we engage students in a more responsible way, but more generally about the impact that higher education institutions are having on societies, and that if these are going to be key metrics that we use in ranking our institutions, then we kind of use these rankings to try and reform and change these institutions towards very different directions. If we insist that teaching skills of academics have to constitute part of what we use for ranking institutions, then that has to lead to some internal reorganization and professional, training of academics to better, engage students. If we decide that we are going to focus on the issue of access and fairness, then the issues that the papers have reviewed, have tried to look at, would actually be understood in a totally different context. With access and fairness, not ranked in terms of the ability of somebody, a student or a family to pay, but making sure that resources are procured to ensure student composition in the institutions do reflect and manifest what the wider society looks like. So I think this is quite an important thing. In efforts to Africanize what happens in these institutions without necessarily looking outdated, without necessarily thinking that, by talking about an indigenous African worldview in the universities, we are hanging on something past, but we are actually talking about how continued local and indigenous thinking about knowledge, disciplines, and institutions should reflect what happens in these universities. And we cannot stop, thinking about these issues if we are actually discussing about the future of the university, either in our different countries or across the continent. It has to really meaningfully reflect what the realities of this continent are. And I think it's a high time that we made a point, put intellectually in our scholarship and in the manner in which we organize our institutions. It's important we make this point that knowledge remains local, and that there is an extent in which African indigenous worldviews in themselves constitute a way of knowing, a way of explaining society, a way of explaining science and innovation that are taking place in our context, and a way of even organizing and managing our institutions. And it's kind of interesting that we talk about management and governance without, theorizing what indigenous forms of governance and management for the institutions will look like in our context. The third framework that informed my comments is the whole issue of funding, which I think the papers deal with quite in detail, but in ways that I thought that in these works, we were stuck in what has been prescribed to us, and that we were not moving forward in trying to find new ways of thinking about, resourcing the institutions, about funding the institutions, and to try and see if there is anything that we have done in the past which actually works. As we know, even before the 1990s, when we started talking about entrepreneurship universities or market-oriented universities, we actually had national universities in Africa. Our flags universities, across the continent, the University of Sierra Leone, Nigerian university, they were established and really did a lot of good work during the 1960s to the 1990s, the 2 decades of development of university in the continent. So much would happen, although the argument was made that the universities remained ivory towers. Very few people were accessing universities, and most of these people were well-resourced. But we know, yes, this was within the limitations of the time, and that this university didn't actually remain vibrant sites of scholarship. So, I mean, we then need to start thinking on what kind, if during the development of university, about 100% of the resources that were getting into the institutions were public resources. And that's the model that was found and wanting. I do not exactly think that the current model that we have had across the continent post-1990, where 70% of the resources that run the institutions are dependent on student tuition fees. I don't think that model is also sustainable in any way as we have seen. I saw that in the paper, the authors tried to really make an argument for this kind of model, and how maximizing on student fees will better organize the institutions. But our experience so far has been that we cannot start talking about expanding the institutions on an equitable and a fair manner, while we rely largely on resources that are generated by students. We have to deal with this issue of funding and fairness. We have to start thinking anew of what it means, when the argument that the public resources are not enough for higher education. It's actually, in most cases, an argument that, is made by external agencies and picked up by our policymakers to justify certain ends, but not necessarily the health of higher education in institutions in the continent. We know that there has been talk since we had the African Higher Education Summit in 2015 in Dakar. There has been an argument that more effort should be explored on how to tap into African philanthropy. The resources of high net individuals within the continent, who sometimes actually do contribute their resources externally. But so far, a model of organizing institutions and engaging these high net worth individuals that are contributing to African university, to the university in the continent, have not been found. We know that there are institutions which do, attract external resources to a small scale. But this is also troubling because largely you see these resources focused on supporting certain projects, certain research projects, but not necessarily looking at the health of the entire institution. Even if they come in terms of capacity strengthening, rarely do we see most institutions' capacity being strengthened in a manner that they remain institutions that are good to serve this continent. And lastly, and this is something that I grappled with in put papers, is the whole issue of arriving at a better theoretical framing of these issues. How do we arrive at a better theoretical articulation of what kind of university is desired in the continent? Most of the research that was cited again was external, and as I've tried to signpost, there's been much work across the continent that has tried to focus on how we can, what kind of university is in this continent, how can it be organized, how do we theorize this new university in terms of the relationship it will have with this society. How do we theorize a new university which, promotes wider access, broadening access, but in a context of fairness, where everybody feels that they have an equal chance of getting to the institutions without necessarily looking at their capacity to pay.
Thank you very much. Hello. Yeah. So unfortunately, the sound on the video is very poor, and it has affected our ability to hear it. So there are very important points that are being made, and I think we will see if we can get an improved version of the video to share. But I think the main points have been made, and we can thank Dr. Wanda for his comments. So we're going to move on to the panel now. But I'd like to say that over the past 2 weeks, I have been attending different events where the issue of universities have come up center stage. So last week I was in Nairobi, and one of the comments that I took from my meeting was that societies are democratizing faster than the universities. And the issue is how to make the universities change and whether this change has to be imposed from the outside. The other comment was about the sheer demographics, what is happening on the continent. The fact that by the turn of the century, 4 in 10 persons in the world will be African, and 60% of these will be youth, and how universities are responding, how they are thinking of this demographic and how they might respond to it. So the question of putting African universities at the service of the youth, I think that Dr. Wanda spoke about how we engage students. And I think that in thinking about managing universities, the issue of the youth, to also turn away the despondence that many young people face, where in survey after survey, our young people are telling us that they want to leave the continent. So how do universities become part of this process of really finding ways to refocus the youth, the whole society, university relationship, for universities to become areas of hope and not of just contributing to churning out students who only focus on how to get away fastest from the societies that produce them. So I said that we had a distinguished audience, and I'm sure that many of the issues that Professor Ayi raised are very familiar to the vice chancellors, pro-vice chancellors, council chairs, registrars, and other people who are seated in the room today, students and lecturer associations. And we've assembled a rich panel to participate in the discussion this morning. First is Justice Sophia Amy Akufo, retired, former Chief Justice and Chair of the Governing Council, the University of Ghana. Then we have Professor Robert Ebo Hinson, Pro-Vice Chancellor, Ghana Communication Technology University here in Accra. Dr. Samuel Nkrumah, Senior Lecturer, Department of Archaeology and Heritage Studies, University of Ghana, and immediate past president of UTAG at the University of Ghana. And Mr. Saeed Nazir, director at the National Union of Ghana Students. So if you could come up here and join me on the panel. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. So many of you are having to react on your feet, so to speak, listening to the presentation. And thinking of what you want to say. So I want to start with some preliminary remarks from each of you. The presenter started with 3 key messages. One about the shift from the Cambodian university to this complex preacher that he called by many names, as intellectuals are wont to do. Multiversities and omniversities, different tensions and challenges, issues that are raised. He also spoke about this shift from, and we're talking about public investment. So, which does not mean that some of the challenges may not be faced by private universities, but the focus is on public universities. The new public management models and what these policies, these models do to the mandates and governance of universities. And thirdly, the challenge of how universities can reposition themselves in this changing environment. Justice Officer, can I start with you? How do you respond to these key messages? Are you persuaded, by the arguments, the issues? If you were, so that would this correspond to your framing of the challenge of managing public universities in a new age?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. I do believe that society itself is becoming increasingly complex, and so complexity of need, complexity of circumstances, complexity of relationships will necessarily bleed into what is required of a university. Because a university, every university, I believe, whether you're going to call it a multiversity or an omniversity, at the bottom line, the university is supposed to be a breeding ground of the next generation, a breeding ground of new ideas above everything else, and a breeding crucible for effective solutions. And every university, public or private, but definitely every private university must constantly and continuously remain relevant by being able to position itself to work within and operate and produce within these complexities. And so, yes, navigating and negotiating these complexities is very important. The only thing is that it looks like if Ghana is anything to go by, listening to the reviewer, it seems to be an African thing where if one does not watch out or stay awake, the political begins to bleed into the academic process. I think this is all I want. If since we're going to come around again, this is all I want to say to start off.
Robinson.
Thank you, Madam. So thank you very much. February is 20 years since I joined the academy, and in the 20 years, I've done at least 40 universities across Africa. And every day I go, I learn. And I think the first thing I want to say is that for universities to really change, we need to become humble. I'll say it again. For universities to really change, we need to become humble. I think the settled thinking is that because we live in the ivory tower, we know a lot. And so we are not as flexible and as adaptable as we should be in relation to changing consumer idiosyncrasies and market factors that dictate that we change. So we are not too quick to change. So that's the first thing I want to say. Then secondly, in the last 2.5 years, if I have to pick up the new public management concept he introduced, and then university reforms, market orientation, customer centricity, we've edited 4 books on just these subjects in the last 2 years, 3 on higher education in Africa and student choice, 1 on market, 1 on market reform. So it's something we've studied across Africa. And so when we speak about managing, to draw on Professor Aye's conceptualization, I think fundamentally we need to understand whether we want to be university, whether we want to be multiversity, or whether we want to be omniversity, because the requirements for each paradigm are totally different. Multiversity is several departments. It's not a big deal. You can operate in TESAN or the University of Ghana and be a multi-university. With Omni University, the assumption is that your digital platforms are so strong, you can have 5,000 students from India. You don't need to step in Ghana because you're offering a certain complex mix of product solutions that don't always require a face-to-face meeting. And it's been done in several universities across the world. So I think fundamentally, we need to agree on what type of university am I leading as a vice chancellor or a pro-vice chancellor. Once you are clear on it, the strategy follows naturally. So because the topic is around managing universities, I'll fall on one of the easiest frameworks we use to do this sort of analysis. It's called the McKinsey 7S framework. And that framework basically says that if you are going to manage well, strategy matters, structure matters, systems matter, skills matter, style matters, your staff matters, and your shared values matter. 8 weeks ago, I was in Joburg and the VC of the University of Johannesburg was being installed as a king of Abiazi in the central region in Ghana. So there were fancy men in Johannesburg making this man chief, and it was a fascinating spectacle. UJ is what? Number one in South Africa last in terms of research output. UJ is 16 years, WITS is over 100 years, they're in the same Johannesburg area. When you study the agility and flexibility of UJ, you understand why they are growing so rapidly. Professor Ayi spoke about registry being ignored. At UJ, all the admin people are PhD holders and professors. I hadn't seen it before in all my traveling. Registrar, professor, director of internationalization, professor, director of marketing, professor. So I asked the VC, the 48-year-old lawyer, I said, what's going on? He said, oh, Prof, you know, the vision, you don't need to talk about it too much. So you need to have people who understand where you are going. You run together. And I was like, okay. I couldn't imagine a public university where the job is not left for people who are not academics. It's open for all. So I think fundamentally we need to understand what type of university we want to be. And when we settle on it, your strategy will inform what you do. The structure will inform what you do. I remember I told the dean several years ago, let's do a productivity audit on lecturers at a university. He looked at me and said, oh, Bob, this see they talk, nobody do some before. I said, I'm sorry. So I quickly repented and I said, I don't talk like that again. But what gets measured gets done. In public universities in Ghana, departments don't produce annual reports. Schools don't produce annual reports. Colleges occasionally produce annual reports. That's why universities forget about it. Now, if there are no KPIs, there are no benchmarks, there's no measurement, how would the universities change? So I just want to support Prof. Ayi in saying that new public management is the way to go. Customer centricity matters, digitalization matters, a focus on student matters, and a clear sense of the type of university you want to be. Then we can see real change. Thank you.
Dr. Nkrumah, waiting to be audited.
Yes, so thank you very much. I would associate myself with what my senior colleagues have already indicated. And of course, to also congratulate Prof. Ayi on a very a job well done. Certainly in looking at what the dynamics have been, particularly I would want to reference our relationships with our stakeholders, both internal and external. And of course, it's one of the challenges that the universities, public universities have had to contend with in the era of these new management policies that government has rolled out. You go to University of Ghana, for example, and of course, we who are the foot soldiers are of the view that there are many bottlenecks that do not allow for the kind of transformation that the university should be achieving. In relation to accreditation, for example, you are a researcher looking to get some materials for research, and then it goes through procurement and it takes forever. And I know Pro-Vice Chancellor would bear me out with UTAG having to knock at his door every time on this matter. Of course, the issue of government directing what has to be done within the university space is critical. You are in the same university, somebody is in a government hostel and is paying 1,500 cedis for accommodation in a year. Within the same university, somebody is paying 4,000 and is oversubscribed. And so it doesn't make sense to me to continue this system of government directing what has to be done, particularly with reference to fees. If it's the case, why wouldn't government allow the universities and put those so-called subsidies in endowments and provide bursaries for students who cannot afford? Of course, the audit bottlenecks. So the independence of the universities are gradually eroding. And unfortunately, I'm not too sure what we can do, but I should think that our councils need to firm up in terms of standing out for what is within the policies that give the universities a certain level of autonomy. Our vice chancellors need to stand up and be firm in taking the lead, in fact, in initiating the dialogue that requires government to stay away to a certain extent and allow for the universities to grow in a manner that it is possible to. And so if the bottlenecks are curtailed from the side of government intervention rather than government's collaboration, as Prof put it, then of course we stand to grow better within the systems that we currently operate within in terms of the global needs of our society. Added to that, of course, is also GTech has a policy on student-lecturer ratio. And I wonder if any university is abiding by this. And the reality is that if I'm teaching humanities and I'm supposed to have 75 students in class, and I have 2,000 plus, and government does not see the need to incentivize you by way of remuneration, then of course the motivation is low. Contact hours is important in delivering quality, which we do not have given the numbers. The institutions themselves put in internal policies, for example, that University of Ghana, if I were to teach twice a week and I have more than 5,000, 2,000 students, I have to split the class into several units and teach several times within the week without getting any additional remuneration. And those are some of the bottlenecks that we need to be looking at if we are to make a headway. Preliminary comments, and then as we go ahead, maybe some other issues might come up. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nazir.
So, good afternoon. Thank you very much for this opportunity. The National Union of Ghana Students remains committed and is glad to be engaged in such an event. So I'm going to be taking a different trajectory to this whole conversation since my professors here and justice have taken it from the senior level. The National Union of Ghana Students represent, or basically we are about defending the welfare of the over 12.5 million Ghanaian students, both home and abroad. So I'm going to be tackling, more importantly, the new public management model that talks about the focus on students. Now, the model of these universities being omniversities, multiversities, or even universities, we the students do not really hold a stake in these conversations. And what we find centralized to us is that the amenities, the infrastructure, and the system be made working for us in any of these kind of universities. If we have a university like the University of Ghana, which is supposed to be a university and it's working as a multiversity, what we the students believe in is that a system that we can thrive on, a convenient environment that would sustain our academics. If we are going to triumph in that area, we are good to go. Now, Doc was talking about bursaries and student loans and student hostels and students not being able to afford all of that. That is a different conversation for another time, because even in our dispensation, last week, we were at an event with the Student Loan Trust Fund, and the conversation is that they do not even have the requisite funds from the GET Fund and even the government's allocation for them to be able to pay these bursaries to students. So it's quite problematic when we look at some of these problems that the students are facing, and we try to run our universities on a different path, whereas we are not inculcating the needs of the students into our ranks. Now, one point I would like to highlight on will be under the legal and policy framework, point 1.2, amending the fees and charges, giving the universities a free hand to charge fees to finance their operations. Somewhere last year, Parliament approved across board that all universities can adjust their fees and make a 15% increment. And believe you me, what we saw across the country was jaw-dropping. University of Ghana, for instance, increased fees to a tune of a little over 20%. It wasn't different for other public universities. So given the autonomy to these universities, even now that they are semi-autonomous and Parliament approving these percentages for them, we are not seeing a sign of goodwill from them. So personally, I do not think that these universities should be wholly given the autonomy to operate, but there should be some sort of government supervision in this, because for instance, this 20% increment that was done, the National Union of Ghana students took it up, and we had to petition a lot of offices before we saw a slight reduction in the fees. This year, it is happening again. Whereas it has been established that the percentage should be 15%, we are still seeing increments from sub-public universities. KNUST, the University of Ghana are not left out, still increasing above this figure. So we believe, if I say I am concerned about this particular point, then truly I am, because the National Union of Ghana students will not relent in our quest to make sure that these percentages are not gone above. Thank you very much.
You see that, Professor?
Yes, yes. Yes, please. Please, I have a quick comment on this government thing, you know, control, don't control, leave, don't leave. And then the snowball effect of high fees, low fees, 20%, they are not happy. Okay, no problem at all. Madam Moderator and my esteemed senior Prosai, part of the challenge of university funding in Africa and in Ghana is that I think public university marketing is also weak. And no vice chancellor comes to work any day thinking, how good is my marketing? It's not even a discussion. So it's diffused around some public affairs, something, mixed sometimes into some institutional advancement, something. But no vice chancellor comes and says, okay, first stream income is students, second stream income, third stream income. The best you get is research. I read a fascinating article by Professor Johnny Japon, a University World News interview he did, and he said government must fund research. I agree. But madam, when you go to Harvard for a 3-day program, it's $10,300. I once had a pro-VC in Legon say, oh, but Prof. Sainsin, languages cannot make money like business school. I was gobsmacked. I was like, languages can make 100 times what business school makes, because people must learn Chinese, they must learn Swahili, they must learn Russian. So I don't know whether government should have more or less control. It really doesn't matter to me. What I want to see is innovation within the universities, so we can generate second and third stream incomes and have enough to run the universities in the way we deem fit. 2013 to 2018, Prof. Sai, Harvard University ran a campaign to raise $6.5 billion. When the campaign was done, Harvard had raised $9.8 billion US. I was in America when somebody gave Harvard $400 million. I was in the States. He's called Paulson. The engineering school is named after him. So I think this idea that we are public university, we don't talk about marketing issues, I think we should repent, because the whole world has repented. Oxford has repented, Harvard has repented. So I think that the quicker we get to the issue and deal with it, the more entrepreneurial we'll become. Thank you.
I think we should get to the point of being an African university and the context in which we are having our discussions. Because the same thing about Harvard could be said of different fields. But I think that Professor Ayi, in his paper, raised the issue of the publicness of public universities. What is a public university? What makes it public? And it seems to me that you cannot ignore the models that are being put and say that it's about how you get the amenities. The model you choose is going to determine what is available and not available. So we can't, NUCs cannot run away from that model. It's not a question of however it is, we want to know what services, etc. It's like whether you are having private hospitals or public hospitals. It matters, right? How do you even access those things? And I think that, that we should also not forget that we have a constitution with directive principles of state policy about governments progressively making access to all levels of education progressively free. How does this sit with a new public management model? All of these are some of the tensions that I think were being alluded to in the paper. And it goes back to the point that you raised of what type of university do you want to be? because you do not have all those kinds of freedoms. And I think that the paper has brought out many of these kinds of tensions of control, how GTech understands its mandate, whether it's collaboration or ordering, etc., how the universities themselves model themselves. So I think it is important, and I think it is also important for us to look at what is also happening around Africa. So you mentioned the University of Johannesburg, but it is within that context, there are so many different types of universities also. How do they also manage themselves? And it is good for us to just not, yeah, we know of what is going on, but it's also important for us to locate ourselves. What is happening in Ghana? So even if you talk about philanthropy, what is possible within Ghana? Who gives what to who? Yes, we are fascinated by all the gifts that Harvard gets, and they are watching your language, and next time, if I give you and you say something, then we will dismiss you or not dismiss you. So we've been watching all of that, you know. So one of the things that I found in the paper, there was a lot about differentiation and specialization, and at the same time about common standards. That was also a tension in the paper because, you know, promotion criteria. Should all universities have the same, or should all public universities have the same criteria? Does publicness mean the same in each case? If you are a professor, what are the criteria that should be used? If you are a research-intensive university, should you have the same criteria for promotion as a teaching, teaching focused university, etc. So I saw several tensions in the paper that reflects what is happening on the ground. And I was not always sure about, yes, we know about these Cambodian origins and things, but since it was never designed for us, how well is it fitting our circumstances? And I think that is part of what the reviewer was getting at when he was talking about alternative models that responds to some of the challenges.
Thank you. If I do remember correctly, I should think that GTech attempted a harmonized promotion policy, and a draft was circulated, and it went around the universities, and my university, Premier University, with these standards would not lower the bar. And so the reality about uniqueness of the institutions, the charters that established them, and the mandates that they were assigned, the quality that they seek to, the standard they seek to hold, I think all of those came into play for that harmonized promotion policy to be taken away. In other jurisdictions, the reality is that if you hold high standards of a certain kind, then of course your professionals must also be recognized accordingly. So that if you were, for example, a professor in the University of Ghana, you probably should not be receiving the same salary as a professor in a technical university somewhere, whose promotion criteria is different from a higher level criteria for promotion. And I should think that those policies matter. And many lecturers would say that let's accept the harmonized system, because I cannot be waiting to produce additional 12 papers when I get promoted to senior lecturer, while somebody else somewhere is getting promoted with a lower number and we are earning the same salary. And so these are some of the challenges that come to play when you are looking at the dynamics of promotion and whether it should be harmonized or not. So if University of Ghana, for example, wants to be recognized as belonging to a certain class of its own, then of course its faculty who have to be promoted based on a higher level criteria should also be making policies that would allow for some remuneration for hard work, which would give us the kind of standard that we want. And I guess that is just a fair call in terms of whether or not we want a harmonized conditions of service in relation to promotion.
Thank you. And I will take off from where you left off, but on to a different tangent because it has always been my view that equity is supposed to be equality. But at the base of all that, what matters is the equity. The equality you may not see the equality, but so long as you can see the equity, that is what matters. So questions of what are the qualifications for getting into a public university? That is equity. But once you get there, there are, and it must be some kind of variations. Even in creation, in those 7 days, different things were done. And the outcomes each day were different. Yes. So the same is not necessarily going to result in the same enjoyment for two different people. If I give you a blue dress as Techiwa is wearing, if I give it to you, you will look funny in it. Yes. But there were two dresses. I took one and you gave you one. But it is utility. There are so many other factors. And now I would get to my least favorite topic, and that's GTEC. The way I see GTEC, and for that matter, GTEC therefore represents government policy. What I say is approbation and reprobation. That's why we all sense these tensions. On the one hand, it is supposed to be like this, but on the other hand, no. Let's do it this way. And there is nothing, you see, there's a lot of contradiction. There's a lot of unnecessary tension. There's a lot of bureaucracy, and it looks like the more bureaucracy, the more effective GTEC thinks things are becoming. But effectiveness at the end of the day is measured by fitness for purpose. And every unit, that should be the litmus paper. Is this program, is this university, is this system that this university is putting in place, are these policies, are they all fit for purpose? And I think every university in the public sector has to have the freedom to determine what it's aiming at, where it wants to go, where it wants to see itself in the next 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, etc. And what it takes to get there will vary. But what matters is that when the whole process should be guided by equity. And that's all that really should matter. And everybody who goes seeking education in these universities will get what they went searching for. Thank you.
Thank you. GTEC, the Director General is not here, but GTEC is represented, and I'm sure that in the open forum, they may have some answers for us. So I want to ask one question before I open up. Must all universities be enterprise universities? Must all public universities be enterprise universities?
They must have certain entrepreneurial systems that assure sustainable quality, high quality, and all that. They don't have to be aiming at becoming rich. But in terms of the quality of what they're going to be giving to their students, oh yes, there should be there should be high quality standards, there should be the usual measurements, measurable standards and so on and so forth. Yes, it's important.
I think I'm using enterprise in the new public.
Commercialization.
Yeah, and I'm asking whether all public universities must be enterprise universities.
They should. Otherwise, they'll continue to become victims of GTech.
So let's ask, I want to ask Nooks. I want the opinion of Nooks.
Thank you very much. So the National Union of Ghana Students also believes, just as Prof said, universities should have an enterprising culture because we've all been in this space where universities, their debate or their argument for the increment of fees is to be able to fund activities of the university, which is not wholly holistic an idea, because if a university can be enterprising enough to identify other sources of income that would complement the university's finances, it will go a long way to benefit the university itself and its marketability and the kind of developments they will be able to have on their various campuses. Thank you very much.
Yes, so just wanted to add quickly that I think there is also the need for the universities to have that culture of connecting with industry that would provide funding for the university and train our students in terms of practical hands-on that allows for them to become people who leave the institution and are proud and are willing to look back at the institution and make provisions in support of. So in some of the universities, the alumni association's contribution alone is sufficient. Unfortunately, I think that our alumni drive as universities in Ghana, particularly, I haven't seen as much happening. University of Ghana, maybe, and the reason is simple, that the alumni may not be as strong within the industry that will reflect giving back to the institution that trained you. And so that disconnect is critical, and policy frameworks, I think, are required to, even if government is subsidizing taxes for some agencies, they should require of them to also train some students on internships and so on, which will cause our graduates to become more relevant, and also that some resources would be generated through that kind of connection. It is very important that the universities evolve that enterprising culture of drawing resources from elsewhere.
Sure, Professor Hinsing has a lot to say. Yes.
Madam, your question is interesting to the extent that it's not being asked anymore. The 100-year-old universities are as enterprising as the 11-year-old university. So globally, it's not even a discussion anymore. And if you read the literature, every university now is market facing. Look at Uncle Ebo White. He's 69. He'll be 70 next year. Uncle Ebo White's Roverman Productions is the clear leader when it comes to plays in Ghana. Our School of Performance has been there for like 200 years. The plays are like 2 million. I personally have spoken to Metro TV before. Randy Abbey has come to Legon, tried to see a Pro VC. We have made valiant efforts to try and improve the commercial appetite. But there's this feeling that public universities are not allowed to be that way. I don't know what it is. It's been there for a long time. So there's this understated, we are just ivory tower occupants. We do research, we produce people. When they come to town, train them for what you need them for. But madam, with all due respect, that's old school thinking. And with the new public management frameworks, everybody has moved along, and that's where we need to go respectfully. The last one is on alumni. Madam, please, alumni don't give you money because you are called Legon or Tech. No alumni does that. Alumni give you money because of something called affinity bonds. If when they were in the university, they didn't have pleasant experiences, they will run. In fact, they are waiting to graduate and vote for their lives because you are a clear and present danger to them. So when they graduate, they are running far from you. So we need clear alumni management systems to mint the gold that exists in alumni for Ghanaian public universities. I rest.
Thank you very much. I see that you are a real marketeer. Certainly, there are people here who have also run universities, so they will also have some views to share. And with that, I'd like to open up the forum to all of you for your comments on the paper and also any comments that may have been generated from the panelists. Prof. Sawyer, I'm going to recognize you. Where is the microphone?
This looks like punishment from an old student, but that's fair enough. Let me simply raise a question. After hearing all of this, I ask myself, what remains of publicness? What is public anymore about our public institutions? Where do we expect the focus on generating new knowledge? Not simply knowledge for a purpose, but new knowledge of a deeper sort. I'm raising these questions because while I recognize the trends that have gone on, a number of questions arise. For instance, there was a question raised about the language department not be able to raise as much money as somebody else. And the response was, you can raise money, you can take Chinese and Greek and whatever else. That's one dimension of it. Who generates new knowledge, scholarship, which is not for a purpose for any money, but scholarship. In other words, the publicness of the institutions. Where does that remain now? Before I make any further comments, I would like some commenting on that question.
Let me say my VC registrar director of finance, they're going for something called a VCG meeting. So I have to run away because there are some checks I need to sign. Okay, so that's the first thing. The second thing is that my friend Professor Awandare is here, and Awandare became a very famous man during COVID because he runs this world-class center called the West Africa Center for WAGBIM, excellent center. And he kept on making the point that if he didn't have funding, they couldn't do the sequencing and the required stuff. That became so critical to dealing with the COVID menace at the time. So the blessing of new knowledge is that it's useful in and of itself, but it has excellent application for solving real societal problems. So I've done 30 books in the last 6 years. Some of those books are being used to teach tourism marketing and bank marketing. So the book has currency in itself for becoming a scholarship avenue. But the modern university doesn't just stop at producing artifacts for libraries or for promotion, but they are keeping a clear focus on applying that knowledge to solve societal problems. That's the difference between the old university that just produces knowledge for itself alone, and the new university that looks for opportunities to use the knowledge it's producing to solve societal problems. So that'll be my humble take on the matter. Let me revert to my beautiful council chair. Thank you, ma'am.
Yes, I think that the universities have not moved away from the knowledge production. It's still happening. It's happening, and new knowledge is generated on a daily basis. The translation of the knowledge into that which solves society's problems, as he said, is that which is missing, and that is where the industry universities disconnect comes in. Aside that, for example, the year of return is something that was generated as a result of people in heritage, people in tourism, taking advantage of a history that government bought into, that resulted in receiving over 4 million visitors in 2019. Before then, it was the government policy that by 2010, we would be receiving 1 million visitors, which never happened. They never made a target of getting visitors come. Why? Because there was no requisite knowledge in terms of what people would want to come to Ghana to experience. And so we were advertising monkey sanctuaries and waterfalls, and who would come to Ghana when wildlife abounds in Eastern and Southern Africa. So basically, I think it's a translation of the knowledge into the market space where we are able to solve societal problems that is missing in many of the situations. But production of new knowledge is a daily affair within the university space.
You see, the issue raised is very important. Publicness versus managerialism or market reforms. So if we take the universities, are they promoting the public interests? That's what Professor Sawyer's thing, answer is about. What are the universities promoting, the public interest? And when you want to promote the public interest, what do you do? So when you talk about entrepreneurship, you are talking about some variables, innovation, which may go to research and scholarship. You are talking about risk taking, which may also go to solving problems. And you are talking about productivity, which should also, because you can't talk about publicness without productivity. And I think that this is why we have the tension. On one hand, publicness. On the other hand, managerialism, market reforms. And I think that we need to find the right kind of balance. And that is the dilemma or the contradiction that we face when managing universities. The tension or the contradiction between publicness and then, of course, managerialism or market reform. And that's why most people will say that, look, why can't you try and have a synergy where you can save 50% this and another 50% that. And then, but there others will be saying that, oh, you can't do that because of the contradiction. But if you want me to stick my neck out, I will say that whether we like it or not, the publicness is very important. And that is about scholarship, innovation. That's about productivity. Market reforms, yes, we must be entrepreneurial. But I think the two must go together, and let us work towards those two.
Okay, thank you very much. So on the issue of the publicness of these universities, I believe central to this conversation is the role these universities are playing to abreast us the system with its publicity. I believe as public universities, at least, we should be able to train and educate our manpower to feed the market or to feed the industry. We are also supposed to be able to provide the most affordable kind of education to be able to feed into our local industry and to be also able to promote our local industry through the trainees that are coming out of these universities. Thank you.
Sawyer, did you want to go on? You said you had raised the preliminary question. Pardon? Later. Okay, Professor Wandari.
Okay, thank you very much to the panel for all those insights, and to Professor Aye for such a comprehensive and thoughtful piece. My contribution really is that I think there has to be an honest discussion about the funding of universities. And I think that this discussion, government, GTEC in this case, but government at large, needs to be honest with itself and say that we cannot support the universities to the extent that we used to. And so let's come up with a system that enables the university to survive, but also still remain a public institution that provides access to people who cannot afford. And I think that the best system would be to have realistic fees, but also have good scholarships that the government can then provide as its a component of the funding. So for example, we could say that the government is supporting 30% of the students, okay? So the university's budget is 100 million, government provides 30 million, and the university has to raise their 70 million on its own. That 30 million, the university agrees with the government that this 30 million can fund 20,000 students. So 20,000 students are on, let's say, government bursary, and the rest are paying realistic fees. Government can decide the modalities for choosing those 20,000 students. Could be based on results, of course, but also regional balance, gender balance, all those things. And then you can have a more realistic funding system, which the universities can survive on. I've always wondered why we still spend hundreds of thousands of dollars giving scholarships to people to go overseas to study. And those systems have now been so corrupted that the selection criteria, we don't even understand them anymore. So why do we continue to do? Why are we shoveling money basically into political hands? Because most of these scholarships are now given due to political connections. Why are we still shoveling our money basically to give to politicians, to give to their party members or family members? Why don't we plow that money internally? I mean, our universities have grown to the level that we can train virtually every discipline here. There are only a few disciplines that we may not be able to train. We don't need to send people to go and learn medicine outside. We can plow that money into expanding our medical schools here. We don't need to send people to go and learn, engineering outside. We can expand and strengthen our engineering schools here. So I think that we should seriously reconsider this overseas funding of scholarships and plow those monies back into providing support to the institutions locally. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, there is a hand on the back.
Thank you very much. I have two questions. Talking about reforming our public universities to meet the requirements of the new age. I have been wondering why our universities in Ghana are not recruiting competent professionals who are desirous of teaching in our universities to teach because they do not have PhD. I'm a journalist. I heard there was someone teaching, for instance, investigative journalism in one of our journalism schools, and I've never seen a single story he has done on investigative reporting. So how do you get someone teaching investigative journalism and he has never, ever published a single story he has investigated? We have people who are very good at marketing, have done marketing for 30 years, are desirous of teaching marketing in our business schools, but they can't be recruited to teach because they do not have PhDs. I mean, who is losing? I guess our universities and our countries are losing because I did my master's at Columbia University, and one of the people who taught us only has a bachelor's degree, teaching a master's program, because she was teaching as a professional course. She didn't need a PhD to teach us what she knows because we needed that practical skill. And I think our universities should start rethinking that. And I also know that in the history of our universities' academic systems, there were so many outstanding people who started teaching with their bachelor's and master's degree. I studied at Legon, and one of the most profound teachers I've had to encounter was the late Professor Kudaji. He taught with his master's degree and became a professor before he went on retirement. And now you can teach even if you have 2 master's degrees at our public universities. And I think our universities are losing out with all these knowledgeable, efficient, practical people who can actually transfer needed and important skills to our future generation who need it to be able to function effectively. My second point is our universities, again, are not, learning to get closer to the public. And Bob said something. If the universities are not making public feel that the universities also build a society, they see the universities like, the ivory tower, far distanced. Even though the universities are studying our societies do not have this close affinity to our universities. That itself is affecting the perceptions of the public towards the universities. And that is why when the politicians bring laws to control the universities don't seem to get the public support to raise resistance against some of these counterproductive acts by the politicians. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Professor Japon.
Thank you. I stepped out briefly, so I don't know whether what I'm going to say has been said already, but I wanted to follow up on the publicness of the university and the issues that go with it. Unfortunately, Professor Hinson has left. He made a comment about what I'm alleged to have said on the issue of governments needing to fund universities. I think context is very relevant. My issue is the fact that in recent times, we have governments declaring university status just like that, with almost nothing or very little infrastructure to go with it. So if you take Legon, KNUST, UCC, you go and you see some basic infrastructure that government has invested in when these universities were set up. But if you go to the new places, I mean, some old building is captured and say, oh, this is the nucleus of the university. At best, they provide you with a few classrooms and you're supposed to run. That brings a challenge, especially when it is a public university and you are restricted by the laws around in terms of how much money you can raise to fund these universities. So I think it is very, very important that when government decides to create these universities, they provide the basic minimum infrastructure. My other issue relates to that of the role of government in the public universities. Of necessity, if government owns these universities, then they have created them for a certain purpose, for development, for the growth of the nation. And they may have specific reasons why certain universities are set up. One thing that I've realized in recent times is the whole issue of mission creep, which has basically, permeated the whole place. You have a university of energy and natural resources. They want to set up a medical school. When GTech clamps on it, it becomes a political issue. And then politicians run with it. Why did government set up a university of energy and natural resources less than 10 years ago? You haven't finished running or dealing with the issues that you're supposed to be dealing with. And then you want to go into other areas. These are some of the things that have made GTech unpopular. Of course, I know there are a few other things that many of us are not very happy with. But the whole issue of GTech trying to regulate as a regulator is something that we need to take in our stride. Many programs, many programs in the big universities are unaccredited programs. And you ask yourself, should this be allowed to go on forever because it is KNUST or because it is Legon? No. GTech must of necessity ensure that some regulations are put in place. Conflict of interest. I was on the GTech board for the last 4 years.
Thank you very much. Yes, sir. Impact.
Thank you very much. I wanted to touch a little bit around the issue of sustainability and to, speak to the issue about universities building capacity of lecturers, professors, and so on to actually manage higher education. Because that is also another way for universities to actually innovate and bring new ideas in order to advance. In the corporate world, just because someone is a very good engineer doesn't necessarily make that person a material as managing director. So we need to also be conscious about how we build capacity of our academics as well as our administrators in how to run contemporary higher education. Otherwise, a lot of good ideas will come, and those who should actually run with it or apply better managerial skills to manage these ideas or initiatives or projects are not going to be there. So whilst we talk about the various issues in which universities can function properly, we need to also think about how we build capacity of management in our institutions across all levels so that our institutions can also run more efficiently.
Thank you. Are there any contributions from this table? And I'm coming over to you next.
Thank you. So I would just want to take off from what our Honorable Prof said. And so you would appreciate what GTech, really has been doing. There are so many programs, for example, that are unaccredited and we cannot allow them to run. So we publish universities, their names, and then only the number of programs, even not the details of the programs, because that will really, bring about a lot of chaos. And we have made a lot of efforts to sanitize the whole education system, especially we are, given this time that we are really experiencing the massification of higher education. A lot of people want to go to school. Hitherto, technical and vocational programs are now being made into real academic, programs. So there are those constraints. I think Justice Ekufu mentioned about the approbation, reprobation, we take certain decisions, we double back on it, and whether some of the things we do are fit for purpose, the bureaucracy that characterizes the the decisions and whatever we do. I think really what we have done is we have actually set minimum standards. I believe we corroborate a lot with the universities, but because we are also a regulatory body, we have to put in place policies that are actually sanctioned by heads of institutions, because our governing councils are made up of various heads of universities in Ghana, professors, vice chancellors. So I think that we need to perhaps interact more and see exactly how we can actually grow the tertiary education system. Thank you.
Thank you. So over to this table.
Thank you. One thing that Prof. Ayu mentioned was the much bandied around transformational leadership. And this is a term that's severally bandied around. And we all know that for any program to survive, it requires the right leadership. So the point is that you need a right leader. So who is a leader? Who should lead any university? How are leaders identified? And it clearly makes a point that there should be training for leadership. One should develop real strategize. And an example, of this, of who is, or who leads and what structures survive. I can give a practical example of the School of Public Health. We had a collaboration with Johns Hopkins, and their interest was really, we were on the, task for departmentalization of our units at the time. But we had a collaboration to only develop one department of population, family, reproductive health. But we took that funding, made the whole school buy into it. So instead of developing one department, we developed 6 departments because the collaboration had a strategic leadership training program. Johns Hopkins needed to make sure that the department will lead to developing population, family, reproductive issues. But we use that concept for each department to develop a strategic thrust. And so with that, the point is that you don't just appoint anyone to lead. There should be efforts by institutions to train leadership. And in fact, their program led to the whole Ministry of Health. They invited Professor Kosa, if he was here, Professor Sori, to involved in the strategic leadership training of Johns Hopkins. And they came back and put all the district directors and regional directors into that program at GIMPA. And it became a required program. And I think that improved management administration within the system. So I think there needs to be structures put into place for leadership and strategic leadership training. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to go over to the panel and ask them to comment, and then we'll end up with Professor Ayi. But I just wanted to say, specifically on the issue of recruitment and what criteria is used. When you set up systems, there are guides, and to a large extent, you try to follow them so that you also do not make things so flexible that they can be abused. In many universities, they have what are called professors of practice. And some of those may not have those higher degrees, but they have demonstrated in their practice. On the other hand, institutions are free to set up the criteria that they want, because there was a time when many excellent lecturers did not even have the opportunity to have terminal degrees. So I think that in each of these, we have to strive for a balance, instead of a one-size-fits-all. But I believe that it is up to institutions to mandate the requirements that they want to guide, recruitment and other things. Otherwise, you could also have some very subjective appointments being made, and we would be here to discuss them. Oh, you wanted to make sorry, let's have Professor Ite before we come up to the.
I know we are coming to the end, and there are a few issues that have been raised, and I'd like to make a comment. The PhD as a requirement, you just spoke about that. it is true that many years ago, you could teach with a first degree, master's, and that was enough. In fact, many disciplines those days, like library studies, engineering, law, things like that, if you had a first degree, you were good to go. But education has advanced, has changed to the point that learning has also become more complex. And because of that, it is good to aim at the top qualification, which is a PhD. But it doesn't disqualify a university hiring people who have knowledge in a particular area which is useful to the university. This is why we have things like a tutor, we have a senior tutor, not necessarily a lecturer, but he knows his subject and it's useful to deliver that particular mission. So there are ways around this. Is if you get the best person to deliver knowledge, you can still hire the person if he doesn't have a PhD. Now, another thing that has not have been mentioned in Professor Aye's presentation is government interference in the appointment of vice chancellors. These days, it is vice chancellor, registrar, and director of finance. Now, these are people who ought to be appointed by the council, but because governments are in a hurry for political reasons, instead of appointing a council so that the council will do its work, they appoint the council together with the management staff. Sometimes the management staff may not be the best for the institution because every university now has its own focus or focal point. And if you put somebody whose training and orientation is not necessarily what will assist in achieving the goals that you want, then you have a problem. This parliamentary control, the fees, has been mentioned already. I think it's very important, and sometimes it's embarrassing that a university that is admitting students is qualified to hire lecturers and run the institution will have to obtain permission from Parliament before it decides what fees should be paid. The mission creep that Professor John just mentioned, it's destroying the basis and it's creating problems for GTech. I mean, why do we call a university University of Environment and Sustainable Development? Why do we call a university University of Health and Allied Science? It is because you want the university to focus a particular area of study. And yet you allow all sorts of things and the universities then mount programs. And if GTech doesn't have the personnel to examine those programs, we are going to have many programs hanging. It will be useful if, otherwise, let's say University of Takrady, University of Sunyani, University of Ford, and then any course that you want to mount, the council decides that that is what they want to do. I think people are also don't fully understand GTech's role. The role of GTech is not to control the universities. The universities are controlled by their councils. GTech harmonizes what we do in the national, if you like, government universities. They are a body that regulates, it's a regulator, but it's also a body that coordinates the activities of all the national universities. But if you treat it as if this is another body that controls the universities, then it means everything you want to do in the universities, you have to send this to GTEC for approval. That is not mission. It's clearly stated in a document that established GTEC that I had a privilege to serve on. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Thank you. I just want to end by going over some of the salient points, which I think we must continue to drive the management of universities, to position them to be able to function effectively and remain fit for purpose throughout the ages. Let me put it that way: new age, old age, now age, whatever. They must always be relevant. Resources and finance, student engagement, relevance, and there with relevance, that's where the publicness comes in, and then diversity. That's where same but different also comes in. Fit for purpose. I think relevance and diversity all also fit into fit for purpose. Fair and equitable access, publicness. So that is where we're dealing mostly with getting there. And when you get there, what you do there. But at the same time, what you do there and what the public gets from what you do there is also important. And then the legal framework that must assure autonomy, because as I think that no matter what we call it, if autonomy is lacking, we're not going to get our public universities to become true centers of excellence. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think the key points have been made. I wished Ministry of Education were here.
Yeah.
They are. Then, of course, the point to be made is a follow-up to what Pro-Vice Chancellor Awandari indicated. The need to have a conversation on funding tertiary education is critical. And the reality about erratic government policies that come into play and draw a huge budget of the government, the Ministry of Finance's budget, and so for which reason they are unable to remit the universities timely and also not providing enough. I should think that, for example, if we are looking at access, and Accra College of Education can admit 300 people, and then Ghana says that we can afford to pay trainee allowances for only 160, so you admit 160. And there are people who have qualification and are sitting in the homes. It doesn't make sense to me. And so that if they become tertiary institutions and are awarding degrees, what prevents them from going to the loan trust, which of course the NUC's president alludes to the fact that he doesn't even have money. The money you are using to pay trainee allowances could go into the student loan trusts, and you are admitting at full capacity. You are also, and that is in which we're providing access. For the recruitment of people who do not have PhDs, I think a senior has addressed that effectively. And there's a possibility, and in many of the times, requirement is that you have to seek permission or approval from GTEC, and then you are granted to do so. In terms of also the universities getting close to the public, some universities have started what they call an admissions drive. And so when they are preparing to roll out the sale of forms, they go from school to school, trying to market themselves by way of providing information on the kinds of courses they do. For the ministry, I think that it's about time we looked at having a high-profile conversation on educational policy generally, the rolling out of policies without engagement with relevant stakeholders is becoming one too many. The free SHS was rolled out without looking at the implications for tertiary space, because within 3 years, you have passed out over 30,000, 40,000 students from one school, and infrastructure remains what it was. I think that all of those border on our ability to deliver quality. And so even as you think that the academy is well placed to be able to lead this chat, and Vice Chancellor's Ghana must possibly work with GTech and the academy to, which is more like an independent body that we think has capacity to look at our overall educational policy from basic through to the tertiary space, if we want indeed to be tertiary institutions that are relevant in our contemporary society. Thank you.
That's why part of why we are having this dialogue.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to comment on Professor Wandari's submission on student loans and bursaries, since it's central to we the students. So it was reiterated that the Ministry of Education is present. Please, if you are here, we want you to carry our words for us, because a lot of advocacies and alluders have been trying to advocate, and we are not getting the right officers. So the Student Loan Trust Fund, in our engagements with them over the years, for about 3 years now, has been able to pay loans and bursaries for just a semester, whereas they are supposed to pay for 2 semesters for some of the universities and 3 semesters for some of the universities. Currently, the Student Loan Trust Fund is in debt of about 160 million. That's representing about 60,000 Ghanaian students who do not have these bursaries to fund their fees and stipends. Away from the Student Loan Transfer, because that is the most successful and most transparent loan trust fund we have in the country. The Ghana Scholarship Secretariat, just as you mentioned, and Get Fund, it's a different ball game. Today, we had to release a press statement compelling the Get Fund, the Ghana Scholarship Secretariat, Dr. Kingsley, to release funds for our students home and abroad. Last month, our president had to visit France to spearhead the payment of some fees by the commission. Just last week too, in the UK, the Home Office had to push for the payment of these fees. We have over 10,000 students across Europe, UK, and America who are being deprived of their certificates as the year ends. Their visas are expiring, their accommodation is being taken away from them, and they do not know how to return back to the country without their certificates from their travel and their education outside. Talk of Get Fund. Now, the whole reason why.
Talk about Get Fund. We are talking about today's session.
Okay.
You can just make your comments and then we can go on.
So basically, I want to touch on infrastructure, the publicity, how public these universities are also. I believe that if the establishments, the reason why some schemes were established are being made to function the way they are supposed to function, and we are not diverting money for education. For instance, the monies for Get Fund, the allocation that's supposed to be 100% last year, for instance, was capped to 61% being used for other government businesses, whereas 31% was allocated for educational purposes. I believe that if the trust fund is not being capped and we have 100% being put into education, you have these universities not struggling to find monies for infrastructure and other development activities, because the government will directly push these monies into the universities. So that's what we are advocating for Ministry of Education. Let's try as much as possible to send a message that all monies that are designated for education should be pumped into the sector, and we wouldn't be having this conversation on increasing fees and what's not. Thank you very much.
Very much. So, Professor Ayi.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Number of issues.
Yeah. I still feel that managing universities will still continue to be an important public policy issue in the 21st century. This is because there are demands about relevance, demands about assets, demands about equity, demands about curriculum transformation, demands about from employers who are saying that universities are not producing employable graduates. So there are several demands. So it's a major public policy issue which we must discuss maybe every quarter as a country. Because whether we like it or not, we are still confronted with the publicness of the universities vis-a-vis the managerialism, which will tell you that, well, the universities are supposed to bring money, so why can't they bring money vis-a-vis scholarship? So there is a big issue about the contradiction between publicness and, of course, the whole issue of fees. So we must be able to resolve that. The issue about recruitment, so recruitment, apart from the two contributions, if you look at the Omni University, it's saying that there will be 3 pathways for faculty or academic staff. One pathway is you recruit lecturers who will only teach, no research. The second pathway is you recruit lecturers who will research. And the third pathway is recruit lecturers who will teach and research. So we must also be aiming at becoming an omni university, a borderless university, or university without walls, where people can stay anywhere in the world and get University of Ghana degrees. So which means that digitalization must be important. The final point which has been made is that, oh, okay, universities, society is becoming more democratic than universities. It's a big issue because the issues are different. They are different. And above all, the fact that the universities have become more bureaucratic because of their own ways of doing things. So that's why. Finally, I think that when we are talking about managing universities, we should also be discussing the whole issue of government collaboration and not intervention. I agree that, yes, these are public institutions, but being a public institution does not mean that you have the right to intervene, appoint the VC, appoint members of council, appoint this and that and all that. We must have a way of trying to ensure that the role of government is well described and well articulated. I know that politicization has been part of our nationals everywhere we want to politicize, but I think we must have a deliberate effort on the part of the universities and their governance and management structures to actually try as much as possible to ensure that the politicization of the institutions will be minimized. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And I want to hand over to Professor Cliff Tego now to give us his closing remarks.
Thank you very much, Emerita Professor Techua Menu. I think it's been a very, very interesting discussion we've had. The paper itself, the main background paper, touched on some of the very key issues as far as management and governance of institutions, higher education institutions are concerned. Unfortunately, the reviewer, we couldn't hear him too well. Rosai, I think that one other way of looking at this subject is that we're looking also at a system, not individual institutions. We are looking at a system, and that's where the things of diversification and differentiations and so on will come in. Fortunately, the correct expression has been used along the line that it's not one size fits all. Now, and so in reviewing what we have, it is correct to look at what others are doing. So we don't basically reinvent the wheel. Some 10 years ago, we had what's called a grantees meeting called by Carnegie, because Carnegie grants a lot of money for higher education. And one of the issues discussed passionately was that of bodies like GTEC. So I'm not surprised that GTEC here is invoking the same discussion. The point I made strongly there is that, yes, GTEC or bodies like that normally described as regulatory, but essentially what they are there to do is to serve as a buffer between government and the institutions. So basically, it's going to guide the institutions rather than hold a stick like a headmaster and say, hey, Vice Chancellor, if you don't do this, this is what we're going to do to you. And what is interesting about it is that some of the Vice Chancellors are members of the council. So maybe the approach has to be changed. I recall this must have been around 2016, 2015, 2016, when letters issued directly from the Ministry of Finance to the institutions, the vice chancellors, that they should bring all their fee schedules for approval. So I was then chairman of Council for Tertiary Education. And some of the VCs brought the letters to refer the letters to us. I didn't bother to go to the council for any discussion at all. I asked the executive secretary, write to the minister and tell the minister that the fees are set by the university councils. And at the end of every year, the councils report to the Public Accounts Committee of Parliament, audit the audited reports, and so on. We didn't hear anything anymore. So I'm actually surprised that some 8 years later, there's a law that now firms that thing. But the point is, that's the kind of thing that GTEC could have intervened in on behalf of the institutions. And the institutions would also have basically fought it. Now, this brings me to a concept that is not new, the concept of an association or committee of council chairs. I know it's been mentioned somewhere in the country before, but the council chairs, if they're together and they go, after all, they're all appointed by the same government. So when they have one voice, that, and especially if you have a leadership here leading that charge, that would be something else. Anyways, but it's an idea that has come before, but I think it's worth considering. Our institutions will continue to be what has also been described as GLO-NACAL, as they are global, they are national, and they are local. And it's important that as they develop, as they review their structures and so on, they keep this in mind. I think the issue of globalization has been touched on. So as we look at what others are doing, again, I must stress the point made earlier that every system is in a certain environment. So we do not necessarily have to follow Harvard. After all, Harvard is a private institution. It's been there for how many? Is it 200 years, 300 years, and so on. And it's also in an environment where people have a lot of money, and it's easy to give. So when we're looking at the examples, we must be looking at the environments in which we operate. I will also say that I like the idea of the leadership training. About 13 years ago, Malaysia decided to go managerialism, as you put it. And so instead of the professors being vice chancellors, they brought in senior civil servants, retired ambassadors and high commissioners and so on, because they know how to run things in the public service. Within a few years, they all failed and they went back to using their professors, but training them. So that's a fantastic idea. But then NCT did some training for councils and deans and so on. I don't remember any of the vice chancellors ever attending any of those training sessions. And we spent a lot of money doing that. On that note, ladies and gentlemen, let me express the gratitude of the steering committee and the management committee of the project to Professor Chuai for graciously agreeing to take on the task of preparing the background paper. Thank the leadership. I think I know your face, Dr. Ezuman Kuban. As for the student leaders, they are fixtures here with us, and rightly so. And until you solve their problems of infrastructure, equipment, and student loans, they will not leave you alone. So I thank you all, the panel members, very much for your insights. And then down there are some very heavyweights, but I'll put everybody together into one heavyweight. And thank you all very much for finding time, the time to be with us and making all those insightful contributions. And Techua, as usual, you and your team, well done. Thank you all very much.
So Professor Tego, thank you very much for chairing the session, and thank you all, and have a safe trip home. Happy holidays.
What's that?